want to talk about immigration. According to some people, there's about 20 million people in the United States of America who are here illegally. Obviously, some people are like, well, just round them all up and get rid of them, which is just the fact that anybody could think that way is understandable because it's a simple and easy way to think about it. But of course, it's inhuman, horrible, and just disgusting that anybody might think that way. Just round them all up and get rid of them. Because, okay, so in that 20 million, that group of 20 million, what kind of people do we have? One example would be some 84-year-old guy in a nursing home who has an expired green card. And it expired 3 days ago, and they never went through the trouble of getting a new green card. So they're here technically illegally, right? And so it's like around that 84-year-old green card holder up who has 5 children who are all American citizens. And so, just it's absurd to say we got to round up all 20 million. What other kind of people are here illegally, and how did they get here illegally? Well, there could be somebody who committed a crime in Mexico or in Argentina or in Laos or anywhere in the world. And in order to get away from the authorities that are looking for them for where they committed the crime, they're a fugitive from law, and they come to America, where this is a good place to hide from going and facing the criminal problems they have back home. We want to get a hold of that person, and we want to send them back to where they belong so that they can face justice. That's obvious. But some, justice systems in other countries are not fair and not good. And then we have that problem. So you might be sitting here looking at a Les Mis situation, some young man who stole bread for his family, and then they're trying to put him in, prison for hard labor for 25 years. So he runs to America, where he's able to find some job work under the table and send some money back to his family and do whatever he can to survive. This story, 20 million stories. You let your mind go through them, you let your imagination roam, and it is what it is. Let's talk about some other cases. Donald Trump recently, a day or two ago, said something about it's too hard to give millions of trials out. Okay, let's say there's somebody that gets apprehended by the police or ICE authorities, and they've already been deported and told not to come back to America. That person would still have a right to a hearing, but the hearing could be very minimal. It could be simply a question of, are you who we think you are? It matches with the fingerprints, it matches with the pictures. The judge, by a preponderance of the evidence, an administrative judge that works for immigration authorities, by a preponderance of the evidence, it's 51% likely that you are it. Preponderance of the evidence is one of the number of legal standards that exist, like beyond a reasonable doubt, clear and convincing evidence, preponderance of the evidence, probable cause. These are different levels of proof. And so by a preponderance of the evidence, if the judge concludes that this is in fact somebody who's been deported before, then you get deported again. And that could be a considerable expense to the American taxpayer. So confiscate whatever they have, maybe put them, in some kind of prison camp where you can work them for a couple of years as a criminal penalty for coming back into America when they weren't allowed to, and get some value out of them that way. I don't know. I mean, these kinds of things, it's hard to stomach some of these ideas, but they're not terribly bad ideas. But the idea that they can't get a hearing, they shouldn't get a hearing, they should suspend habeas corpus, which is a whole thing we need to talk about. It's just crazy. Okay, one immigration judge could handle, 100 hearings a day, you know what I mean? If they're the hearings of that variety, are you who we think you are? You've been deported before and here you are again, 20 seconds later, you are somebody who's been deported before and you're here and that's it. That hearing's over in 20 seconds. You got your due process. And then if an ACLU lawyer or some liberal-hearted guy like me tried to, file writ habeas corpus into the federal court systems to protect that guy, here's the thing that you do, is that you sanction any lawyer who files an obviously frivolent writ habeas corpus. You have no basis for filing it because it's clear the person's been deported before. It is clearly identified as that person. So you have to have a really strong reason to try to, contend. Any lawyer, any certified lawyer of the United States of America, any officer of any court, who tries to make an argument has to be careful. You can't file something that's frivolous, utterly without, a foundation in reality. So the idea that we don't have time to have these kinds of hearings, I think is just absurd. We absolutely do have the time to have these hearings, and we can put a sufficient number of, administrative judges into place to make sure that each case is looked at, of anybody that we're actually going to deport, that each case is looked at, with the appropriate amount of attention to detail. Why are other people here here illegally? Somebody comes to America to study on an F1 visa, they get their bachelor's degrees in something, and then, money's tight, things are difficult, they can't figure out what to do. They ask for permission to stay in America to work or something like that. And, they miss a filing deadline or the paperwork's not clear. Next thing you know, they're working under the table somewhere. And they're now illegal because their F1 visa's expired. That person, when they're caught for, in that kind of position, I certainly, think that they should have a right to a hearing that would be a little bit more protracted. Why can't you go back? Why didn't you save up the money to go back? Those kinds of questions could be asked. And, in some cases it might be wise on our part, particularly, is that, we shouldn't give that much time or attention to somebody who's obviously committed a crime and been found guilty of doing that. There it is. This kid on the F1 visa who stayed after might have been forced to stay after for, after their F1 visa's expired because of economic reasons, because they're poor, they're broke. They see so many more, and that's the one thing that just bothers the hell out of me. You look at like El Salvador, a nation of 6 million people. I remember listening to the preachings of some guys about the School of Americas back in the day and how, the awful economic system of the 14 families of El Salvador is what created the conditions that made it so that, there would be widespread gangsterism in that town, that world. That's why I've always had, 6 million, you're a nation of 6 million people. Look at somebody from Trinidad, for example. It's a nation of 1.4 million people. You could live in Trinidad or you could live in America, where you're in a nation of 340 million people. Look at how many more opportunities and choices and things you can do here. Of course you would want to be a part of this system rather than being part of a system that's just 1.4 million people big, with so many square miles of land. And so what's El Salvador, 6 million people? And the rich families already own everything. So you're lucky if you're going to have a cardboard shack for yourself. I'm sure, I don't know what it's really like, and I'm sure I should be careful about what I'm saying. But it's so obvious to me that wouldn't it be great if the people of El Salvador were just simply free to come to America to live and work? You know what I mean? And vice versa. There's a lot of good shore properties down there to live in. You know what I'm saying? You're right on two different oceans. It'd be great, awesome. And it's just, isn't that the kind of world we really want? And I don't get me wrong. People who are guilty of crime are of course going to be tagged with that, with criminal records for life, and have to go to prison for some time. And those people are going to have all kinds of freedoms restricted forever. And that's probably appropriate in many cases. That's why always a mechanism to free people with pardons from those kinds of things later on. But that's how I would look at it. But concretely, what do we do in America currently? 20 million people in the country illegally. And if you do this without due process, if you just, anyone who's here illegally, go back to the 84-year-old, guy with the expired green card in the nursing home, no hearing, no nothing, round them up, send them wherever. And it's like, how inhuman are you, And you would say to yourself, well, maybe the immigration officer in the moment will make a good decision to just leave that guy alone. Okay, but you see, that's always going to be the problem when you let slip the dogs of war. You're going to have one immigration guy out there, one immigration captain out there that doesn't give a shit, and the kind of inhuman kind of things that they're going to start to do. So I just can't. I can't be friends. I don't even want to talk to anybody. I don't even like a person who realizes what happened to Garcia. The Garcia kid, he's 16 years old. He comes to America. He's never committed a crime, and that matters to me. Did he come to America illegally? Apparently he did. But he had a U.S. citizen brother that could help him out. And he apparently was under pressure from some gang in El Salvador. He's under pressure because he's from El Salvador. You know what I mean? He's not part of one of those rich families, so they don't own anything. It's like, this is the solution to these problems, explode up to like the book of Revelation. They explode up to a jubilee, for everyone. It's like, freedom for everyone. How do we create a moment of freedom for everyone? You break the seals of Revelation. And in an insight once in my life, what were the seals of Revelation? They were debt, oaths, ownership, laws, contracts, prisons, and weapons. It's like, if you could just smash those, a weapon is a spiritual tool. It really very much is. If that person over there owns a weapon, the way you treat that person is differently, because it's a spirit. To owe that person over there money, it's a spiritual thing. To have taken an oath and a promise to do something, it's a spiritual thing. The 7 spiritual things that lock our current system into place. All important, all necessary, all good spiritual things. Oaths are good. Owning weapons are good. Having prisons are good. Labeling somebody as a criminal is good if the person's actually a criminal. All these things are necessary. But it's like the vision of Moses. I don't think he got it from God. He might have thought he got it from God. It doesn't matter. But the vision of Moses, and one of the reasons why so many people keep reading the Bible, because the truth has got to be there, is because there's an awful lot of truth in the Bible. It isn't the word of God. None of it came from God. But a lot of it came from people who were really trying to figure out God and the nature of reality and what is good. And that vision of Moses was having that every 50 years, have that jubilee. Every 50 years, set everyone free. Let everyone go back to where they're from. You can enter the city through the gates. You put your white robe on. That's the idea of somebody who's been exiled because of crime. Because of crime they've committed, they can now return home. You know what I mean? Because the jubilee years come and we're going to forget that past. Every 50 years we're supposed to have one. And we're in the middle of a big one for the Catholic Church. But in 2033, that's going to be the 2,000-year history of Jesus's, crucifixion on the cross. And I'm sure that he existed, and I'm sure he was crucified. I'm also very sure he was never resurrected. Those kinds of violations of laws of physics don't happen. But it doesn't mean there isn't something beautiful and poetic to this. That in 2033, the 2,000-year history of the resurrection of Jesus, I could think of the crucifixion of Jesus, I could think of no better year to trigger a genuine jubilee of human freedom for everyone. And how do we get that freedom? It's like universal basic income. We're going to have to tax, the rich for 15% of everything they have. And, and slowly but surely take that value from them. You don't have to do it in an instant. That would be inhuman. But you slowly but surely take that value over time from them. And if they're productive and they know how to make value anyway, what difference does it make? They'll move their cheese. There's a thing about Move My Cheese. There's an old book called Move My Cheese. I don't know. It's a story about, the point wasn't having money. The point was the good pursuit of it. It's like, what did St. Paul say? The love of money is the root of all evil. But it's sort of like the love of doing something that's good and money comes with it. Now that isn't the love of money. There was this book, Who Moved My Cheese, back like 20, 30 years ago, that had this idea that, so what? So what if I lose a lot of my money? The whole point of it was to do something useful for everyone else and do something that's good for people. So I, try to get back concretely to immigration. I see what's coming. I know what Donald Trump's going to do. I mean, I forecasted something like this back on Facebook. I think in 2015, I was like, I flipped off. I couldn't believe he was saying the 11 million are going to be gone in an instant. And I was like, what? Because that's just the beginnings of fascism. And I understand how much, I don't want to insult everyone. It's like how dumb people are, but it's kind of that. But it's like how much people want a simple answer. How do you deal with our immigration problem? Everybody wants a simple answer. And I think that the answer is simply complex. Is you slowly but surely go through a process of making legal everyone who's illegal. Barack Obama tried to do that with those Z permits. It's like anyone who's here illegal, give them a Z permit, make them come out of the shadows, take their mug shot, you know what I'm saying? Take their fingerprints, get their DNA, you know what I mean? And let them go to work and maybe they pay an extra tax. It's just like what David Wood says the Muslims do, you know what I mean? When they have people that won't convert to Islam around them, they have to pay an extra tax, a tribute, I guess we do the same thing, I guess, to anybody who's here illegally, and that extra tax could just simply be, you owe us that $3,500 to get that Z permit, and it's got to be, updated every 4 years. And then I just hate the idea. I've always hated the idea that an ICE police officer could come and ask me for information about a student or something like that, and I got to tell him, I ain't helping you. I should always want to be able to help an American, police officer doing his job. But come on, look at the problems. Look at that judge they just arrested. Look at what's obviously happening there. If somebody who's in the country illegally knows that as soon as they walk into that courthouse, they could be arrested, it's not a place of sanctuary, then they're not going to go to that courthouse. And then that person who's here illegally could have seen a robbery happen and they need their testimony, but they're not going to show up. And so it's obvious why a state judge a state courthouse wants to make, their courthouse a place of sanctuary so that people can freely show up and do, and testify to what they need to testify to. But what, the Trump administration apparently wants to do, and his ICE ways, they just want the simple. Go ahead. Grab the 84-year-old guy in the nursing home with a green card that expired 3 days ago and put him on an airplane. It's like, you give that guy a hearing, you give everybody a hearing. And the idea that the Constitution says that the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended when there's a time of invasion is the argument that Trump is obviously going to make. And it works. The argument's smart. It's sophisticated. I saw that argument coming a long time ago, 10 years ago. I've been reading the Constitution every now and then off and on my whole life. I remember that, of course, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. And that makes sense because, you got a Civil War going on. Some federal judge in Philadelphia says, send me this prisoner who's in this prison, way out west somewhere. And it's like, no, and no, and by the way, no, we don't have time to do that right now, Your Honor. It's just fair. When you got to suspend it. But don't get me wrong. It is so clear that we easily have the resources to offer sufficient due process hearings for everybody that we're going to imprison and eventually deport because they're here illegally. You follow? We easily have the resources to do that. The smart move, of course, is to make as many of them, come out of the shadows as easily as they can. Get those, Z work permits. Be completely legal. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to ever become a citizen, I suppose. You know what I mean? They're not allowed to vote, not allowed to own guns, not allowed to sit juries, never have the rights of American citizens, but certainly they can own property and they can work and survive, And that's what we really should be doing. It's so obvious to me, but there's a lot of people out there that just tap into this instinct inside of us that comes from some place in our human evolutionary development. It's like, yeah, round them up, kill them all. It's like, I just can't stand it. If you can't look at that Garcia case and look at the details of it and come to realize that he should be brought back America and reunited with his daughter, you're crazy. I mean, you're just crazy. It's a 9-0 decision of the United States Supreme Court says so. Look, the guy came to America when he was young. He's 16 years old, right? He never broke a rule, right? Is he tagged with MS-13 on his hands? Maybe, sure. That's why you give him a hearing, maybe, but also, who hasn't had trouble with the mafias of the places where they come from? Yeah, any Italian guy had to deal with the Italian mafia at some point in their life. Any Irish guy had to deal with the Irish mafia at some point in their life. And so it is with them. It's not any different, And so, I'm sure he didn't want any part of those gangsters. I'm sure he didn't want no parts of them, but sometimes he had no choice but to go along or deal with things because that's the kind of pressure he was under, But he's never been convicted of breaking a rule. And the story about him transporting 8 people without luggage to a construction site makes me think of the Underground Railroad. That's what it makes me think of. And you guys, it's human trafficking. I'm like, it's the Underground Railroad. That's when you got 20 million people living in your midst trying to figure out how to survive and get by. They're going to do whatever they got to do to survive and get by. And when I say whatever they got to do, I don't mean hurting anybody or stealing anything. They're going to work. They're going to do what they got to do to get by, And so, an American citizen wife, American citizen daughter, or son, yeah, she pulled out a restraining order against him for abuse. Yeah, I saw that, but the restraining order never hit. You know what I'm saying? So whatever was going on there, it's just like, it is what it is. He's just never, broke any rules. And he was going to his immigration appointments every year and he never missed. But here's the thing that just bothers me the most is that while Trump was president in 2019, an immigration judge just sat down and gave him a hearing and talked to him and really listened to the guy. It's pretty expensive to deport him. You got to pay for the plane ride or whatever you got to do. And I'm sure the immigration judge is reading his facial gestures and the way he looks and talking to him, the way he sounds, how good his English is, all that stuff. And, an immigration judge was like, this guy isn't a bad guy. He's this hardworking dude who's trying to make it, and his wife's an American citizen, his daughter's an American citizen. It's like, I'll give this guy a break, You could just see them making the decision to do it. He's an asset to America. He's a benefit to America being here, And this is the travesty that is Donald Trump. The inability to work hard, the inability to do the right thing. He pardons everyone who was a part of the January 6th riots. We all know that there were some guys there that should not have been pardoned. Everyone knows that. We all know that. But it's like, it's too hard to look at all of them, so just pardon them all. Okay. You know, and so it goes with the, so it goes with the immigration guys. It's like, okay, round them all up, kick them all out, round them all up and do what you got to do. And it's like, can't you just so clearly see that there's another way to do this? It's so obvious, you know, people, you know, immigrants who committed crimes are one thing. Another thing, when you talk to an immigration judge, talks to one of them and they have them evaluated by a psychologist and they're clearly psychopathic or problems like that, these are good reasons to get rid of them. Anyone remember that whole Cuban thing where Cuba sent over on boats all the mental patients because we had a law saying if you're Cuban and you make it to American soil, you're automatically granted asylum. So Fidel Castro sent us all his mental patients. Oh, Castro, one of these days, the American flag is gonna fly over Cuba again. And it's gonna be a day of freedom and liberty for everyone there, not a day of oppression. And, oh God, I don't even know what I'm thinking anymore. Yeah, I see what's coming. I hate it. It's obviously such a better way to do things. So everything, I call on whoever could ever listen to what I'm trying to tell you, you know, insist upon good policy here. Don't compromise. It's like I'm saying what we should do is 2 + 2 = 4, and they're saying that 2 + 2 = 6. Don't compromise and say 2 + 2 = 5. Don't compromise. We obviously can have good, sensible immigration policy moving forward based upon the current situation that we're in. You know, just have some trust and faith in the administrative judges that we select to look at the cases on a case-by-case basis. If it's deporting a guy again who's already been deported, those hearings can last 20 seconds. There's your due process. Those cases can last, they'll be very quick and they'll be done on Zoom if they have to be. But at least they got a hearing. At least they got that shot to talk. You know, another guy's getting deported and you got clear evidence that they're a fugitive from justice in Brazil somewhere, or, you know, or from Mexico somewhere. Hey, you know, tough. But that Mexican police chief is corrupt and he's trying to get me. You know, well, you know, there's ways you can check with stuff like that through the State Department and give the guy a little chance, but maybe to make his case. But you can certainly sanction lawyers who file frivolous habeas corpus just to stall things, to muck things up. And that's definitely what you should do. So that, you know, nobody's going to file that case for them. And they just get deported when they obviously need to be. You know, so when you look at 20 million people in the country illegally, I totally would support a constitutional amendment that forces everyone on board with it. You know, forces all police agencies on board with the enforcement of immigration law. The border can be everywhere. Make it very, very easy because of the situation that we're coming out of. Make it very, very easy for a person to get, you know, working permits and stay in America, you know, because they haven't committed any crimes otherwise. And it can be economic hardship and things like that are the reasons why they're here, why they overstayed their visas or whatever. And even ones who jump the border, even those guys, you know, could have had good reasons to do it. Give them a shot. All right. Love you all.